Hi, this is James Tanner. Welcome to another segment of the Exploring Genealogy series. This is segment number 7, and it continues the researching in the FamilySearch family tree, which I began in segment number 6. You're welcome to go back to segment 6 or stay here and listen to segment 7. In the previous segment, I left off looking at Alexander Bragg, who is an ancestor of mine. While you're doing your research on the FamilySearch family tree, it's a good idea to periodically view your relationship. See if you're really related to the person you're working on, if that actually matters. In this case, I see that Alexander Bragg is a direct line ancestor. He would be my great grandfather. So you can check on the view my relationship link, and you can count back using greats from your great-grandfather or your grandfather, and then start great-grandfather, and you can see exactly how you're related to a direct line ancestor. So as we're checking through the process and seeing that we are related, the next question is to look at the information that we have about this individual. When we left off, we had raised some issues about the family because of moving around. They had children born in Bristol, Massachusetts, in Attleboro, Bristol County, and without any designation, and with a variety of different birth records reported, and a number of sources changing dramatically from a little bit in some of these instances, and then a lack of standardization. It appeared to me that this was a family that was ripe for research, and it would be a good idea to check to see if all of this information is actually correct. If we go back to our view the relationship link, we'll see that my particular connection to Alexander Bragg comes through his daughter, Sara Bragg. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. Sara Bragg is listed as the last child, born in 1737. The mother dies in 1754, marriage in 715, father dies in 1750. That is within the range of possibility, and so we're probably not worried too much about whether or not this particular individual was actually the child of Alexander Bragg. And in addition, there are 23 sources on Sara Bragg. But once again, what we have is some difference here in the places where these people were born. Her immediately previous person, Constant, could be probably as a male, and he was born in Swansea, and there's some other Norfolk, and so there's kind of a traveling around here. Back in these early days, as is shown by many of the studies that have been done, statistical studies show that the people did not move around. In fact, the average distance for birth, death, and marriage is about 6 miles from the original birth. Now, that's not a hard rule. There are reasons why people do move, and part of this process of doing the research is to discover whether those reasons are valid or not reasons. So the first step we're going to do today on looking at this particular person, Alexander Bragg, is to look at his sources. There's supposedly quite a few here, 18, and many of these deal with the children, and some do not. Noting over on the right-hand side, there's some that have been submitted by, it says FamilySearch, and others which have been submitted by individuals. If we look down to the type of records that these are, I can click up here in the box that says Detailed View, and that gives me, opens up every one of these records to the detailed view. As I get down in here to these records, I see some that say that these are extracted IGI records that were used to create this person. This creates an interesting issue. Part of the reason that this is a question is that this extracted IGI, or International Genealogical Index record, was not added by, it was added by the process. It was not added by an individual. It was added by a process. And in this case, what happened was that back during the 1960s and 70s, there were a number of people, and it may have been, in fact, it could have continued into the 1980s, but I think that it was primarily in the late 70s and early 80s, if it lasted that long. There was an extraction program that was going on by FamilySearch, the predecessors of FamilySearch. FamilySearch did not exist back in that time period. It was the Genealogical Society of Utah that was the parent organization that created FamilySearch. So the question here is, how valid are these extracted records? Well, what the process here was that the extractors, the people who were extracting the records in the stakes and wards of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for the temple work, were simply looking at the records and extracting those records for ordinance work from the original records. So they were given copies of rolls of microfilm and those, or records, or index records, or whatever, and they were then typing those records into forms, and then those were processed to provide names for the temples. When this information in the IGI was entered into the predecessor to FamilySearch, the FamilySearch family tree, which was new.familysearch.org, the IGI records were simply put into the mass of records that went to make up the new.familysearch.org website. And then after that new.familysearch new.familysearch.org website was created, then and merged into the family tree, these records were processed by FamilySearch and entered into and matched up to individuals in the family tree. Sometimes these records are valid, and in many cases they do create some problems because they are not necessarily the same family. So the question we have here is an interesting question, and that is, how many people with the Bragg, B-R-A-G-G, surname do we have in Massachusetts at that time, and is there a possibility that these records that were created from the extraction program and then added to the FamilySearch family tree, how do we know that they are accurate? The answer to that question is simple. We are going to look at the records individually and determine if they apply or if they do not apply, and we're going to do some additional research and see if we can establish from other records whether or not these individuals were part of this particular family. If they're not, they're not. And if there's an issue, a side issue that seems to come up occasionally, and that is that the temple work was done for these individuals as part of this family, the answer to that is, well, it was just wrong. And if they're not part of the family, I will try to establish which family they belong to, and if they need to be if the ordinances need to be redone, they will be redone. So this is the situation. How does that arise? Well, let's look back at Alexander Bragg and in his details. And we see that his father was Henry Bragg, supposedly married in Salem, Essex County, Massachusetts. And he was in Ipswich Plantation, which is part of the Plymouth Plantation. This isn't correct. This isn't standardized, and so it's not exactly correct in the way that it's put here, but it was part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He was born about 1657. So by the time that Alexander Bragg was getting married in 1715, if that is correct, and by the time he was born, then there were quite a few Braggs out there. Henry, William, another Sara Bragg, Alexander is down in the list of children, and then there's a Nicholas Bragg. So, and there's two Sarahs here, a 1687 and a 1694. That's not impossible, but we'll have to examine that. Right now, I'm focusing more on Alexander Bragg. The issue here is to work your way backwards. It's tempting to jump back another generation and try to do changes and try to get working, but the focus should be on establishing a relationship, a direct relationship. Okay, so returning to Sara Bragg, who is my direct line ancestor, that question, that is raising some other issues here, because Sara Bragg, as noted in the last segment, was born in Attleboro, which is an interesting situation, because none of the people died in Attleboro, and some do not have death places, but they seem to be mostly in Wrentham, if they had anything. And then there's some New Hampshire people who died in New Hampshire, and there's Wrentham, and there's Attleboro, no deaths. So we're looking here for consistency. We're looking here to understand the dynamics of how this family moved and how they evolved over time. The question here is, how did Sara Bragg, who was born about 1737, which means that so far we have no birth record for her showing that she is part of Alexander Bragg's family, how did she get to die in someplace called Span, Johnson County, Georgia, in 1813? Well, that's an interesting question. One of the questions that I would look for immediately at this point would be, how far is it from Attleboro to Span, Georgia, and whether or not Span, Georgia, and Johnson County, Georgia, existed at that time. So why am I making this? Why is this question coming up? Well, the issue here is whether or not Sara Bragg was and is a child of Alexander Bragg and Elizabeth Luther. If Sara Bragg is not a child of Alexander Bragg and is a child of some other Bragg family, or not even related to this particular Bragg family, then we need to check, because what we need to check here is, okay, we'll go to Sara Bragg. It says she died in Georgia, and she married somebody named Benjamin Zalatus Ray, and he was also born in Wrentham, and he died in Wrentham in 1787, has 52 sources. Did Sara Bragg, she died in 1787. She lived until 1813. Did she get married again? Let's look at her children. These are the children now. We're looking at the next generation down. And the question is, where were these people? They died in Vermont. This person we don't know about. This person died in New York. This person died in Vermont. This person died in Vermont. This person died in New York. This person died in Massachusetts. Apparently didn't know. We don't know where he died. This person died in Vermont. This person died in Wrentham, Massachusetts. This person died in Wrentham, Massachusetts. And this person died in Pittsford, Rutland, Vermont. Every single one of the children died either in Massachusetts or Vermont. And how did Sara Bragg end up dying in Georgia? That's a more important question now than doing further research on Alexander Bragg, because if Sara Bragg, for some reason, is not the daughter of Alexander Bragg, then we need to know that before we get too far down the road here. That's the major issue. Okay, so now what we're looking at is a different problem than we started with. The first problem we started with was doing research with Alexander Bragg. And with Alexander Bragg, we were looking at kind of a variety of different places of where the people would have been born. This is between around the late 1700s, early 1800s. All of these children were born in the 1700s, from 1760 to 1783, if these are all part of the same Benjamin Zalatus Ray family. And if he died in Wrentham in 87, then how did Sara Bragg get to Johnson, Georgia? How was that happening? If none of her children lived there and none of her children died there, did she individually decide to move to Georgia? How did that happen? This is an interesting question. So we're going to look and now refocus the research on a generation closer, and that's on Sara Bragg, who's the daughter of Abraham Bragg. So here we are with Sara Bragg, and so the first thing we're probably going to do here is to see if that death record is correct. We have Sara Bragg in a Massachusetts marriage, and we can open up all the details here and see this. And we have a Wrentham, and we could view that record right here by clicking on the link in the record, and it says that Benjamin Hall was married to Sara Bragg in Wrentham in 1759. Okay, so how did she become the wife of Benjamin Zalatus Ray? Benjamin Hall? Benjamin Zalatus Ray? Probably not. That's an interesting question. So here we are discovering some more information about this family. The important thing to understand here is we're looking at information that's already in the FamilySearch family tree. I'm not doing basic research from zero where there were no entries. We're trying to confirm and see whether or not this information is correct. So let's go back to Sara Bragg and look at another one of these records. Here's another Massachusetts marriage record. And take a look at this one. And this one says that she married Benjamin Bay in Norfolk in 17th of April, 1759. Okay, so we have a question here about who is Sara Bragg and who did she marry. Two marriages, both appear to be in 1759. Let's go back here and check this one again. 17 April 1759, Benjamin Hall. Let's look at this record and see what it actually says. This is supposedly the actual record. And we'll have a look at that. This is not an original record. This is a book. And it shows the Braggs. And the book here is... we'll have to go out and look at the reference to see what this book is. It says that Bragg marries Sarah and Benjamin Ray, April 17, 1759, and Sarah and John Hall. So there are two Sarahs. One married to Benjamin Ray on April 17, 1759, and another one on February 15, 1759. So that simply is a question of which of the Sarahs here were this. There are two Sara Braggs. Sara Bragg marrying Benjamin Ray in April 17th of 1759, and a Sara Bragg marrying a John Hall, 3rd of Norton. So John Hall III of Norton in February 15th, 1789. Okay, so there's that's a little bit different there. That's 30 years later. And if we look at this back at Sara Bragg, let's see what that says. Let's go back to our Sara Bragg person and look at her details. It says that she married Benjamin's Loveday in 59. He died in 87, and she lived till 1813. She could have very well be the same Sara Bragg, and this could be a second marriage, which is not shown here in the FamilySearch family tree. So we've already found some additional information about Sara Bragg that may not have been reflected. And an interesting fact is that the record is already attached. So if the Sara Bragg who married this person named Benjamin Hall back in that says 1759, and the record here has got it mixed up. Obviously, the FamilySearch has done a little bit of problem here because whoever did this picked up the wrong line, because it's Sarah and Benjamin Ray in 1759, and it's Sarah and John Hall in 1789. So she could have married this person. And let's go back and see who, what that record is. And this one's wrong. This information is definitely wrong. And it was in Rentham. And that's Massachusetts Marriages. It's just simply a book called Massachusetts Marriages. We can look at that and get the document information by clicking here. And it's a database, it's a FamilySearch database, and it's run from Massachusetts State Archives in Boston, and it was a microfilm record. Okay, so we have now discovered a very interesting situation, and it's with one generation closer, who's my direct line ancestor, Sara Bragg. And so we'll have to continue this in the next episode. Thanks for watching segment 7 of the Exploring Genealogy series. Of course, we'll be continuing this particular examination in part 3 of researching the FamilySearch family tree. And that should discover even more interesting problems with the family tree that I've selected here. Suggest that you might want to subscribe to this YouTube channel that I've created here. And thanks again for watching.